I want to take this pretty smooth miniature and turn it into a furry beast, so to do that I'm going to use some colour mixing, some brush techniques and even a pen for some finishing details to add depth to this jackalope miniature from Moonstone. And this miniature comes in the starter set, which I've shown here already in the channel, and what a great addition it is. These Moonstone miniatures are all resin and fantastic quality. I want to add a bit more texture to this jackalope though. So I've started off by priming it, and I've just used a black primer. Any black primer is going to be great for this. And normally I dry brush it like I've done on previous models like Greymare here before I start adding the paints and the layers. But this time not. I'm just going to start with that black base, and then I'm going to use about 7 main paints to get the effect I want for the fur, and I'm going to use some other colours as well for details like the eyes and the lips too. And I'm going to be using these 2 thin coat paints by Duncan Rhodes, and these are my favourite paints at the moment, a real fantastic quality and range. I've got about 16 of these all together, and I'm on a mission to just use these 16 paints to paint all the new models I've got for Moonstone over the next few months. So those are the main 7. I'll be detailing them as we work through the video. And I've also got yellow and red here, which I'll be using to make orange. I'm going to use an Army Painter wet palette and the Army Painter Wargamer Regiment brush. I'll also use some smaller and finer brushes to get the techniques down for the hair. Let's get started then with that marine blue and the Doom Death black, and I'm going to mix about 3 parts blue to 1 part black, and this is going to give us a nice rich dark blue that we can use for the shadow areas. And I'm not trying to get in any hair or texture here, I'm just blocking in the shadow areas, so those areas underneath the legs, any folds where the light's not going to hit, I'm painting in there. It's going to be a bit lighter than the black, but that blue that comes through is going to contrast really nicely to the oranges and browns that we'll be using on the miniature. So for the areas that are going to be heavier in shadow, that blue, although it's not going to look blue when you see it through the fur, it is going to have a really nice effect overall. So that's it dried. You can see how that's going to come. From the top, you can't see it, but underneath you can. Then we're going to go with 2 thin coats Cuirass leather, and now I'm going to start painting in all the different hairy bits of the miniature, which to be fair is pretty much everything except for the antlers and the eyes. So I'm going over it here, and what I'm trying to do is use the texture that's on the sculpt, and I'm going to follow that with my brush strokes. So now I'm always painting on individual hairs here, and I'm using the larger brush. This is the regiment brush. I'm being pretty heavy-handed because this is the layer that you're not going to see as much of later on, but it's going to be adding to the darker shaded areas, and it's going to add some depth to the model overall. There you can see it's dried. You can hardly see it in the camera there, but it does come through later on. Next up, I took some Skeleton Legion, and now I've wet this down with 1 part paint, 1 part water on my wet palette. And I'm going to use this for all the areas that are going to be almost white later on. So this is going to be the base colour for the whiter areas. So this will be things like the toes, and then we're going to go for the hands, areas around the face, and the tail as well. You can see here once we've added the water, there's not as much pigment in the paint, so you are going to see a lot of the brown coming through, and that's okay. I'm going to go over it a couple of times, but I'm going to leave some areas with not as much of this paint over it, like the shadowed areas under the belly there. I'll just do 1 coat, but on the antlers, I'm going to do 2, and in some parts even 3 coats. But I do want some of that base colour to come through, so it's good adding this water to it. There you can see once it's dried the effect you're going to go with, and I like that on the antlers. It's going to add a nice realistic effect to it. But I'm adding a bit more of the paint now and going over the areas on the face that I want to stand out much more. And so I've not used quite as much water here, so I've added a little bit more paint to that 1 part paint, 1 part water mix, and so the paint is going to be a little bit thicker going on, but you don't want it really gloopy or thick. You still want it watered down so that you can build up those layers and still see the detail coming through on the sculpt. Right, onto some white star paint now, and I'm just at this point going to block in the eyes, and I thought it would be good here just so I could get a good idea and make them stand out, and that's going to help me when I start layering up the fur. I'm going to move on to the smaller brush now, and you don't have to, but I just find with the smaller bristles I'm quite heavy-handed when I paint, so that's going to make me be a little bit more careful. But I'm going to use the fat brush to mix my next colour first. So I'm taking that dark brown and then mixing it with the lighter brown, and this is going to give me my next colour. And we're going to start layering up now and adding more and more fur, getting lighter as we go. So I'm going to go over pretty much all of the areas I've already gone over with that darker brown, and I'm still using the texture of the sculpt to decide where I'm going to put the brush strokes, and I'm following that around the curves like of the leg, on the shoulders, and then just being careful to start from the bottom up so that we get that effect of fur laying on top of each other. You'll find with a small brush you go back and forth to the palette quite a lot, and you can see that I'm just twisting the brush through the paint to get a nice point to my brush, and I decided I'd put a little bit just at the base of the tail here and just work up as well. So I don't want the tail to be completely white, I want it to almost blend in with the darker brown of the body, and I'm just going all over the model now, really picking out every area. And there you can see once that dried, that's really started to add a little bit of depth to it now, and we're going to just repeat this process, getting lighter and lighter as we go. And I'm going to take some dwarven skin now, and then I'm going to add that to that brown mix. This is going to lighten it, but it's also got a little bit of peach or orange in there, so now we're going to start to get more of that orange into the brown colour as we get lighter. That's going to help contrast against those shadows. It's also going to work well when we put that dwarven skin on the nose and the lips too. And then I'm just going to repeat that process of starting lower down on the model and then working my way up with those brush strokes. And I'm going to be careful here not to go over the areas that are going to be in the shadow now. I'm coming away from them a little bit, just like we do when we layer up the different colours going from light to dark. I'm kind of following that process, but I am going to still continue with the brush strokes for each of the hairs. Here you can see I'm just finishing that lip and the nose with some of that dwarf slayer. Now on to some scarlet red and the yellow. I'm going to mix these together just to make an orange. I don't have an orange colour in this range of paints. You can get one, but I've only got the 16 paints, and orange isn't one of the colours. So I'm going to make my own, and then I'm going to mix that in with some of the darker brown. I want this to be a bit lighter than the previous layer, so I'm going to add a bit more of the orange, some of the dwarf slayer, and keep going, again using the bigger brush to mix the paints before going to that smaller brush and then start layering up again with those strokes for each of the hairs. And I'm just getting smaller and smaller now on the areas that I'm going to be painting the hairs. I'm thinking about which area is going to have more light hitting them, and because this model's got lots of shapes to it, I can shine my lamp on it and I can really see which areas would get the most light, so that's really helpful. And then I'm going to go a little bit lighter again by using some of the earlier colours that we've used, mixing them together, and I'm not adding any of the orange this time. I want this to be quite bright against those other colours, and I just want some of that orangey brown to peek through a bit. So I'm going to go over with those small strokes, and I'm doing less and less as we go, so you can see here really starting to bring out the highlighted areas, especially around the face, on the shoulders, on the knees, and on the tip of the tail as well. Now you can see at this stage we're really starting to get some depth as all these layers are overlapping, all the lines we're painting on as hairs are crisscrossing each other, and all the different colours are coming through. I'm going to keep going, I'm going to go a little bit lighter again, so just thinning that down, add in the two colours to go a little bit lighter, and hardly putting any strokes on now on those most raised areas. So just a few, being very careful, making sure that there's enough paint on the brush so I'm getting some nice neat strokes and really catching those areas where the light's going to hit the most. I think we can go a little bit lighter, so I'm just going to lighten that paint a little bit more, and you can see the palette really coming to life now with all the different shades. And I'm going to go a little bit lighter, and this will be the very finishing touch that we're going to go for the darkest fur. So this is very careful now, maybe 3 or 4 little lines on the knee, a few around there on the top of the thigh, and just picking out those raised areas. And there we go, that's the dark fur done now. So we're going to start having a go at the lighter fur. We're going to use the same techniques. We're just going to take that paint that we originally used on the lighter fur, add some white to it, and we're going to gradually reduce that, getting lighter and lighter to add depth. It's a real fun process. I really enjoy doing this. I haven't tackled a model like this using all these brush strokes before, so I was really happy with how it turned out. And I'm just being careful here as I do the hands and the feet, just to make sure that I'm doing little strokes and just not making it kind of too obvious that the lighter fur is separated from the darker fur. So it's just taking your time, really looking at those areas, knowing what you're going to paint before you go to the model, and making sure you're going back and forth with your brush and getting those bristles nice and pointy to get those crisp lines. And we've gone a bit lighter with the paint now, so just going over those same areas again, waiting for it to dry in between each stage. And if you haven't tried using fewer paints before and creating all your own colours and shades when doing the layer technique, I can definitely recommend it. It's really fun, and also if you haven't bought any paints yet, this is going to save you a lot of money. I spent way too much on paints in the past, and I think if I'd known then what I know now, I definitely wouldn't have bought so many. But there we are. This is all done now, all painted up for the fur areas. We've still got a little bit of work to do on the tips, so I'm going to go a little bit lighter. Not quite white, but pretty close to it, just to finish off and really make that pop and make those hands, feet, the belly and the tail stand out from the rest of the darker fur. I also want the face to be really creepy, and so I want that to be quite bright, as you can see there around the eyes. So let's start working on those eyes a bit more. We're going to take the yellow paint now, and I'm going to add quite a lot of water to this. Hard to say how much, maybe 3 parts water to 1 part paint, so it's almost like a wash. And this is going to go over both of those eyes and just add that nice yellow tint to them. As the face is bright and I want it to stand out, I want these eyes to really pop as well. So I think if I went over them with like just 1 part water to 1 part paint, it'd be too rich in yellow. I want that white to almost come through that yellow wash. And there you can see they're still nice and bright. You get an idea that they're yellow, but I want to darken around them. So I'm going to take some Battle Mud Wash, and this is the only shade that I've got in this set, which I'm really happy with. On Greymare, the previous model I painted, I thought it was awesome. The best wash I've used so far from any range, so I can definitely recommend giving it a go. And I'm going to add it on the eyes here. That's going to make all the eyelids stand out a little bit. I also put some on the teeth to make the mouth more predominant too. And then I thought, while I've got it, I'll try a little bit on the antlers to see what that looks like. And I really like the effect. So I went over both the antlers and gave it a nice coat. And then when that dried, I took a light shade of the original colour that I used on the antlers and just picked out some areas to highlight it. And this is watered down quite a lot, about 2 parts water to 1 part paint, so that you still see all that dark horn kind of colour coming through underneath. With that done, it's time to add those pupils, and there's quite a large area here. I'm going to use a pen. These are the Micron 01s waterproof pens. These are very small, so you can get some nice details. If you're ever doing dots for eyes, this Micron 01 is perfect. You get bigger ones. The 03 might have worked here as well, but I'm going to stick with the 01, so if I make a mistake, I can just take my time and build it up slowly. And I'm just going to block in that whole colour with the pen. I find doing eyes terrifying, especially with a brush, with my hands shaking. So using a pen, I just think I've got a bit more control, and also that ink is going to just be there all the time rather than it running out on a small brush and you have to keep going in and out, and maybe you put too much on, maybe not enough. At least with a pen, I think you've got a bit more control for areas like this, but make sure that the colour you're going on top of is completely dry before you attempt this. But here you can see that's coming together really nicely. I can take my time, stop and look at it and make sure I'm really going in the areas that I need to. But this is a brilliant sculpt because there's a clear line that you can use as your guide when you're blocking in the black. I give that a minute. It pretty much dries immediately before I get this white paint on a very small brush, and I just do 1 quick dot just to give a little reflection. And we're done. We've finished painting. Here's the palette with all the different colours that I've used for the miniature. And here's some close-up shots of the jackalope ready to go in Moonstone. Really happy with how this turned out. You can see all the colours coming through. We've got a nice fur effect just from all the techniques. So we've combined the brush strokes with the texture of the miniature to create a pretty sinister looking character, which I think is going to be great fun to play in the game. And he's going to be accompanying Jada and the other fawns. So I've stuck with that theme with the orange base, which I think is going to contrast really nicely against the shades of Moonreach that Greymare belongs to. I'll put some links down below so you can find out more about Moonstone. Go and check out their website. I've also done the unboxing of the starter set with all the miniatures I'll be painting over the next few weeks and months. And some other videos are already up for Greymare, a fantastic character, one of my favourite miniatures for a long time. And I've also painted Jada from the set as well. Really happy with how she turned out. There's also loads more Moonstone videos on the channel if you'd like to have a look at those. But in the meantime, I'd love to hear what you think about this painting technique to create a fur effect for the jackalope. Let me know in the comments section down below. If you've got any questions about Moonstone or anything else I can help with, please add them in the comments. Thanks so much for watching. I hope this video has been helpful, and I look forward to seeing you here again next time on Tabletop Skirmish Games.